Let me try that again. Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is 12 Gauge. Thank you for showing up. Tonight we have a very special show planned for you. I have two special guests. I'm waiting for one to show up. One is in the green room. And welcome to everybody who's in the chat currently. Rondi, Aquarius, Swamp Rose, and hopefully more people will show up. I want to state some chat rules that I want to put in place. Please keep it classy. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things, so try to be open minded whenever you're going to comment or you're going to give your understanding, because we agree to disagree, and everybody's opinion is valid. So without further ado, I'm going to bring my guest up, one of them, and we'll we'll kind of take up a little time until Mr. Morales gets here. Without further ado, let's welcome Karla. Hey, Karla, how are you?
Hi, can y'all hear
Can
me?
y'all hear me?
Good.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you this time. Yeah, we can hear you. We can see you.
Okay, good.
Okay, good.
All right, how are things been going?
Good.
Good.
They've been
They've been
been
been.
You're kind of cutting out a little bit.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's a
there's a
delay. I don't know
delay. I
why.
don't know why.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Can you repeat what you said?
Let-
Yeah, I was
Yeah,
just
I
gonna
was just
say,
gonna say,
I'm doing really
I'm doing
good.
really good.
As most of
As
you
most
know,
of
I
you
don't know
know,
if
I
you've
don't know
got
if
some
you've
news
got some
there.
news there.
I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and so just in the middle of treatment for that, and so just getting things squared away for that. It looks like everything is just falling into place. I'll be starting radiation very soon. So it looks like my start date for that is going to be June 17th. So I'm
Okay.
excited but scared.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. So the chat was saying that there was an echo. Is it better now? I put the echo cancellation on there, so hopefully that'll work. Okay. Carla, so you want to tell me a little bit about, we're talking about gangs tonight. We're talking about cartels, and we're talking about things of that nature. Can you tell me a little bit about your understanding about the gang culture?
Yeah. Well, okay. So, the last that we spoke, for those that weren't here the last time, I worked at TDCJ at the maximum security prison in Amarillo. That is where we house, notorious criminals. And some of them, and the majority of them, are gang members. We do get a lot of, gang members. And the prison culture is definitely something to be taken lightly. When the gangs, get together to cause chaos, they can really cause some major chaos. So what they do is they have TDCJ, just to kind of give everybody just a little bit of background. TDCJ actually has a gangs unit. And so the gangs unit, those officers are the experts on all of the things that come in. So when a prisoner comes in, you've been convicted of a crime, and your crime could be, let's say, but there's some suspicion, right, that you are a gang member. Well, then the gangs unit is going to take pictures of all of your tattoos, every single one of them, wherever they may be. Even if you are not a gang member and you're tatted up, they're gonna take pictures of your tattoos, because the gangs and everything, they operate. I mean, how they know who's who is through the tattoos. So,
Right.
and the tattoos are always changing, not changing, but they're different, right? They're different. And so they're going to take pictures, they're going to take pictures, they're going to document that. And we need to know that. And a lot of the times, believe it or not, the gang members, they will be very honest about their affiliation. Because one, if you belong to a particular group, you definitely don't want to get housed with enemies and you're the only one representing, your gang or whatever. So
Hmm.
they try their best to house them separately, but definitely, kind of the organization of these gangs is something else. So, and what I mean by the organization is some of these gangs actually follow like a leadership, kind of like what I'll compare it to is kind of like the military. We've got our privates, our specialists, our sergeants, our staff sergeants, our captains, and it just goes up like a chain, right? And some gangs are very organized, while others are not. So like if you consider yourself, let's say, a blood or a crip, typically those gangs are not very structured. Some of your other gangs though are very structured, like your Hells Angels. They are extremely structured. And oh gosh, the Zetas. That's your Mexican gang. That's one of the Mexican gangs. There's many of them,
Right.
but that's one of your Mexican gangs. They're
Well, let me
structured.
ask you. Let me ask you something really quick before we continue on. We're just kind of waiting on Mr. Morales, but you've given us some very
Yeah.
insightful information. Um, as far as on the streets, have you ever heard of any kind of cartels or any kind of gangs that are infiltrating the college campuses that have, you know, had college students to kind of um, distribute drugs or, hide money or, weapons or anything of that nature?
To me, for me, no. I mean, like, and I've been out. I haven't been working, for TDC for a long time. So
Hmm.
my experience more comes when after they are caught. Now, when I was there, and I can only attest to when I was at the prison, it wasn't something that we saw. We
Hmm.
saw one gentleman. He was housed there. Man, I should have looked him up. He was killing for one of the cartels down south. He started killing from the age of 13. He's considered a serial killer in the sense that he's killed three or more people.
Right.
And he was really young. He was like in his 20s when he got convicted, and his face is very tatted up, and he was a part of the Zetas. And gang, and so he was recruited at a very young age, but he was recruited for the streets. He wasn't in the college settings, or anything like that. Now, it's known that the cartels, in Mexico, they do try to infiltrate, and they like pharmacies and doctors. They do try to blackmail them, because they need the pharmacist, to push the drug. So, like a lot of the times, if you go to Mexico, there is a very strict rule of what you can bring back and the amount that you can bring back. So, like a lot of people will go over there for like the diet pills that are not available here in the United States. And the cartels are extremely intelligent. If they have infiltrated a pharmacy, you can get and it'll be a drug, right? But it is packaged and sealed, and you wouldn't know what you're taking. So,
Right. Right.
yeah, I mean, it is in, so that's why, like, a lot of the times, it's to your own safety, like, unless you truly know people over there or like that, you need to be careful with that, because the drugs, that's one of the ways that they get them in here. But as far as like college college age college students to go. I'm gonna venture to say, I don't know, and that would be kind of hard. Just if you think about it, right? You would have to have somebody that graduated high school and had the wits about them to go to college, right? And if they have the wits about them, be kind of hard to infiltrate them unless you're going to use their families against them or something like that. But it wouldn't be.
Well,
I just don't see it.
the
But
reason that I
I don't
brought
know.
that up is because early on in the Idaho 4 case, because
Mhm.
I did put the link up here to kind of incorporate that with what we're talking about. Early on, they were talking about it being a drug house. They were talking about it as being a trap house, and that this was a possible cartel hit because pills had been flushed down the drain, and things of that nature. And that never felt right with me because, as far as what we're talking about, I've never heard of any kind of gang hit to be utilizing knives. Have you ever
No,
heard of that?
no. I mean, no. It's usually with guns. Well,
Yeah,
what
yeah,
now? you know I mean, what I have known now, and it's also, the cartel, their mindset. And when I talk to gang members, in the prison, right? Because I was like you, a student, and I was like writing papers, and I had to go talk to them, which was very made my job very nice when I was getting my
right,
degree.
right.
From my understanding, you have to be trusted, so they're not going to, if you are, they gotta trust you to give you those drugs, because they're giving you drugs is handing you money, and then they got to make sure that you're going to give them their cut. I mean, so it's not as easy as people would think. I can't just walk up to a gang member and say, hey, let me push some XYZ, for you. Like, it just doesn't way. It just doesn't work that way. You've got to be really trusted, or they've got to be really to the point to where they know that they've got you extremely scared,
Yeah,
and they've
sure.
got a family member of yours or something like that in order to manipulate you.
I mean, I'm not I'm not discounting that there wasn't drug use in that house. I'm not discounting that, there could have been, very limited drug activity as far as, minimal drug interactions. They might have known some very low level dealers, but nothing really upper level. Like people were making it sound like that they sent in an assassin squad and just took out four people and left the other two. And I mean that's really weird to me, and I've always thought that as well. That if you were gonna go in to hit a home, you would be looking for money that they owed you. You'd be looking for the product that they were
Mhm.
selling or holding for you. And you would just take everybody out so there'd be no witnesses whatsoever. So none of that happened, right? So it's very it I've watched other creators, and they've even gone to the point of saying that, well, it was because the mothers were in, the two mothers of two of the victims, they were into drugs and they had
Mhm.
open cases,
Mhm.
and they speculate that they had that they snitched on somebody.
Mhm.
So these individuals got with their connections or whatever, and they were getting light slap on the
Mhm.
hand
Well,
stuff. Go ahead.
but Marty, here's the thing, Marty. I think that you are onto something. Okay, you truly are. Here's the reason. Typically, but not always, right? Because I can't say nothing is always or never, right? You got to throw that disclosure out there. But typically, when cartels kill people, right?
Hmm.
They typically do it quick. It's going to be one shot, one kill. From my understanding, one shot, one kill. They are, how a person is going to unalive another person says a lot about the relationship between the killer and the victim, right?
Hmm.
I mean, even Ted Bundy, he it was one swipe, so it just, I think the Idaho 4, I would be very surprised if the cartel was involved in any of that, because the in the matter of which unfortunately these victims lost their lives wasn't like that. It was more personal, that it was more, more of hatred, towards a total stranger. If the cartel was involved, I agree with 1,000%. They would go in there and they would kill everybody in and out. One shot, one kill. Let's go. They're going to rob the place. They're going to take the money. They're going to look for the drugs. There's going to be evidence either on the kids' cell phones or the mom's cell phones, or something, because they want their money. You can't get money from a dead person. Okay.
Right,
You just
right,
can't. You just can't. Right. So there's going to be evidence, that the cartel is trying to create you to, to do something heinous or something like. There's going to be evidence of that, because they're not in the business of just killing people. They want their money.
right, right,
Money is a big motivator. So I agree with you 1,000%. I don't think that when you look at those small details, right? And those are the things that we learn in college. Whenever we're going down the criminology path, is that we get trained, to look for the details. And with the Idaho 4, they weren't killed in the manner of which typically most cartels are going to unalive people.
right.
So for me, I agree with you. Do people use drugs, and do they owe people? Yes, oh yeah, that, yeah. But is that who came in and did these vicious crimes? I really sincerely doubt it. I mean, but that's my opinion. I
Yeah,
could
of
be
course,
wrong,
of
and
course.
in the trial, we could see something totally different. But I sincerely doubt that, because I mean, if us, the United States, thought that the cartels were involved, it would it would it would just be a very different investigation. Because now you've got the DEA. I mean, there's got to be strong evidence to implicate cartels or members of the cartels,
Right,
in my
right.
opinion.
I mean that
Could be wrong.
I've never really gone down that rabbit hole because like what we're talking about, there's a lot of deviations on the level of killing, the level of, what the payoff is, because at the end of everything, if you owe money, even if you owe money to the local dealer, they're going to handle it one way or the other. I mean, because like you said, they want their money. And if they can't get it from you, as you stated, they would know who their families were. Their families would be in danger at this point. Their other family, the extended family, all those people would be in danger. Even though they do have a suspect in custody, the families would be in danger if this was really truly a hit. You know what I mean? It wouldn't have just ended the moment that the suspect got in custody. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, because that means that the other, members of that particular gang are on their way, and I mean, yeah, we would definitely, people would be in protective custody. I mean, the United States is going to take care of, the family members and things like I said. That's why I say, the investigation would be, very, very, different. I would be surprised, but I don't think so. I think what
Okay.
people, maybe with Idaho 4, maybe because I thought about it today, just thinking about it, well, what is a serial killer? Serial killer is anyone now, anyone that it has killed three or more, you know,
Well,
without
the man of
being
the hour is in the
overly restricted.
backstage. Karla, let me bring him up, okay? Here's Gabe
Yeah.
Morales, everybody.
Hey, aloha from Hawaii. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Mr. Morales? Nice
I'm
to
doing all
finally
right,
meet
brother.
you. Nice to finally
Yeah.
meet you. This is my co-host, Karla.
All right.
Hi, how
Hello.
are you?
Aloha.
So
So,
we were just talking about cartels and their method of their methodology and things of that nature. But before we begin that, can you tell the chat a little bit about your expertise?
well, I've been working criminal justice for over 30 years. I recently retired again. I came out of retirement, retired in 2000, the end of 2016, after working almost 25 years at King County Jail. Before that, I worked at Folsom Prison for 6 years. I was retired for a few years and then came out of retirement briefly to work at a federal detention facility in Tacoma, Washington, that was an immigration processing center, basically a deportation center. So I dealt with a lot of drug cartel types there. And yeah, and I just did that for about 6 months and I just like, I'm too old for this. And went on back to Hawaii. My mother had cancer and she beat it, but she had thyroid cancer. And so went back to take care of her. But I told her, hey, it's expensive to live in Seattle. So I had to
Yeah,
go back to
yeah,
work for a while and then took her to her appointments. So I worked graveyard shift and then I took her in the daytime to her appointments. But it was just,
yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
it was not good. And then she beat it, like I said. So I was like, hey, I'm going back. Going back to Hawaii.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
but yeah, I've been doing it for a while. Yeah, even before that, I grew up in the housing projects in Seattle and born in a place called Yakima, Washington, which a lot of people are kind of surprised, but it's over half uh, Hispanic, mostly Mexicanos,
Hmm.
and it's a farm worker community. That's how our family got up there to Washington State, but a lot of gang problems. You ask anybody about Washington State, what's the gang capital, and they'll tell you Yakima, Washington. It's just it's pretty bad. Um, and so yeah, so I grew up around the gangs and basically worked the prison gangs. Well, I went in the Marine Corps for about 4 years, and so then when I got out, wasn't sure what I was going to do. Applied to I applied for the Department of Corrections there in California. Got hired out of Folsom Prison, so that was an eye opener because I dealt with street gangs, but prison gangs was like going from the little leagues to the major leagues. You know, what I mean, it was
Mhm.
pretty crazy.
Both of y'all have served our country. Thank you for your service and
Yeah,
your
yeah,
time. Carla
it was good. It was
has been in the army, and
all right.
she,
Yeah, I
so
think it's
I
a good
guess
experience. Yeah, I think all young people should either be go to the military for a minimum of 3 years, or college, or Peace Corps. If you don't want to do any of that, go to the Peace Corps. Get away from mom and dad. Find out how the real world is, because I think about a lot of these young people. A lot of them, to be frank, are kind of privileged and a little bit spoiled. And I think if they saw the real world and see how good it is, yeah, our country is not perfect. We got a lot of problems, but you go to some of these other countries and then you're like, God bless America. Yep, yeah.
yes, exactly. So Gabe, let me ask you a quick question. Were you part of the gangs growing up? I mean, were you in a gang, or were you just you know, did you just know of gang members, or were you exposed to any of
Well,
that?
yeah, I grew up around a lot of gang members. My brother was a gang member. He's also a pimp, a drug dealer, an addict, an offender, in and out of jail, prison all his life. I had uncles that were in and out of the system. My grandfather did almost 10 years for manslaughter back in the 1940s, mid 1940s to 50s. So, I grew up around a lot of people in that lifestyle, the criminal lifestyle. And it's kind of weird because I think the public, the majority of them look at criminals as, hey, they're bad guys, just terrible people. But I didn't consider my brother that when he was using drugs and alcohol. Yeah, he was that kind of, Dr. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of, he would change. But,
Hmm.
we grew up as best buds. We were only a year and a half apart, and I really didn't see him uh, as that really terrible person most of the time. I did see it, like I said, sometimes catch glimpses of it when he was under the influence. But
Right, right.
I think that's pretty common with a lot of people, especially offenders' families. They're like, hey, we love them, and they do, they do love them. They love that little boy, that 5-year-old, that 10-year-old that they knew growing up. They may not love that 20 or 30-year-old that's committing crimes and stealing from them and using drugs and doing terrible things to other people. But it's a kind of interesting dynamic, I think, probably that needs more research if we're going to stop the criminal cycle in a lot of these dysfunctional families.
We have a question for either one of you because y'all are the experts. I'm just kind of still learning. I've just done the counseling with the criminal offenders for so many years. I'm just throwing my hat in the law enforcement area of it. You know what I mean? We have a question that says, "Do gangs in prison keep connection with gangs outside of prison?"
Yes. Yeah. I mean, at TDC, because I'm from Texas, so at TDC, yeah, yeah, they do. But it's very heavily coded, right? Because they cannot write letters back and forth to one another, right? We're going to intercept that. We're going to stop that from happening. But when the criminals, the offenders, they get very they're very intelligent. So they may call their mother and they're talking to their mother and they may say, well, just tell Johnny, I said hi and make sure to get him a lot of ice cream, blah, blah, blah. And to us, we're thinking, oh, he's probably talking about a little boy named Johnny and, he's saying blah, blah, blah. And all of that is probably code for something completely, totally different. Okay. So, and they do that. They will communicate through their families, but it's hard for us, whenever like our gang unit listens to those phone calls, but it's still very hard because they switch it, all of the time. Or even letters, they'll go in and they'll confiscate everything. And even letters, it just means something totally different. We try to keep that, we at TDC anyways, we try to keep up with it. But are they in communication with one another within the prison and outside of the prison? You bet. I mean, it's hard to stop that. It's hard to stop that. Do we try to control it as much as possible? Yes. We do try to control it as much as possible. Does that still happen?
Okay.
Absolutely.
Gabe, you have anything to add on that?
No, absolutely correct. Even though they may be barred from communicating, they have ways of doing it anyways. I know in California right now, a big problem is smuggled in cell phones. And so unfortunately we have corrupt staff that'll bring in cell phones and I forget what they get paid, but it's like $5,000 per cell phone. It's some crazy amount. And so they bring in like 10 cell phones and they make a lot of money off it. And so then now these guys, and then the charger comes with it and everything, I guess part of the deal. And these guys then are able to communicate. I just did a special on Aryan Brotherhood members. And one of the main guys, Ronnie Yandel, he has like his own YouTube channel that he does on his cell phone. And so,
Wow.
yeah, I'm like, why didn't they confiscate that? But I think also maybe they wanted to see who he's communicating with. So maybe give him enough rope and they'll hang himself. That kind of that theory. I'm thinking because it's kind of unusual. That wasn't going on when I was there. We didn't even have cell phones barely came out. There were those big ones.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
that's
at
like
true.
on
TDC,
that '70s show.
Right.
But
one
now,
thing,
yeah, they got these cell phones, and they're uh, communicating with the outside. And then previously, even before cell phones, like you said, they have codes and they have three ways. They can put up, let's say they're talking to their mother, they just put the cell phone up to homeboy over here on the other one, and they got like a three-way call going. They don't even have to switch. They're hearing each other and talking to each other. And they do the small talk at first, and then they'll talk and get into the business because they know that these phone calls are being monitored, but the monitors a lot of times lose interest after a few minutes because they're going on to the next call that they're listening to. And
Right.
these guys know that. I knew a guy at the jail who also knew how long it took for the recording to kick in. So he would call the guy, talk for 15 seconds, hang up, because about 15 seconds is when the recording actually started to take note of what was the conversation. And
Oh,
he'd do
okay.
that like 10 times and get the message across. And authorities weren't ever able to catch what they were saying. So they're very, they have nothing but time on their hands. They're very good at figuring out a way to beat the system.
oh
You
yeah,
know, I was
absolutely. Absolutely. Like, I'm just going to piggyback on what you said for the cell phones, just so our audience kind of knows, those of them that are from Texas. So one thing that Texas has started doing is they have raised, Texas has raised their salaries because they did notice that, just like you said, we do, unfortunately, not all staff is bad, but we do have some bad apples. On those bad apples can cause a lot of issues, with taking bribes from offenders. One of the things that a lot of people have tried to do or have tried to tell TDCJ to do is to put a kind of like a net over the prison so you can't signal out. There's no signal. It's going to be dead within that area. But one of the reasons why they don't is because if they do that, then we can't get EMS out there and emergency services should anything, happen. But yes, we also have a lot of issues with cell phones. They people come out and they throw them in the fields, and then the offenders from the fields that work the fields get it and they smuggle them in. So sometimes it's staff, sometimes they know where they go to work, because we need, I mean, they work the fields here in Texas. Anyways, we have them working outside. So, they have to, unfortunately, complacency does have a big part in that, where officers get, they slag, or they get paid to turn the eye. They may not get paid to actually smuggle in the cell phone, but they get paid to turn the eyes, away while, another offender smuggles in, the cell phones. But we generally, get caught. And a lot of the times is why we come in and we do those shakedowns. you know
Hey Gabe, I was gonna ask you, you said you and I had a conversation the other day, and you said you had, I guess, worked with high risk youth. How do you know that they're actually, in your working with them? How did you realize that they were actively in a gang or they were just perpetrating what they saw a gang doing? You get what I'm saying, as far as how do you know if they're really into the gang, like they're a member, versus they're playing a role? Because I'm from a small town over here, and a lot of the kids, they're carrying guns, and they're tattooing themselves, and they're talking the street lingo and all this. How could you really understand their level of being involved, I guess, would be the question.
Yeah, good question. Before I went in the Marine Corps for about 10 years, I did youth intervention work. And then there was about a 3 month period down in Los Angeles where I worked out of Eddie Lee Group Homes. They had 21 group homes in the Los Angeles area. I think there was some in Orange County too. So I was the gang specialist. I would do the gang assessments on youth there. And all of the ones that I talked to, of course, they were referenced to me. Interview this kid. We think he's a gang member. Every single one of them, of course, is Los Angeles. A lot of them grew up around neighborhoods where that's just a way of life. And so I didn't, I did deal with some that were just on the outside edges of it. And that's like what I told you. I think that was uh, probably where I had the most job satisfaction is working with youth that never joined gangs. They went on to college or went on to the military or went on to just getting good jobs and careers. And they said that I made a difference in their life. So even gang members, I've had quite a few gang members that did a lot of time in prison, and I've had them come up even with my family. And to be honest, it kind of startled me at first because they kind of rushed up on me and wasn't sure what they're going to do, but they always
Right,
stuck
right.
out their hand and said, thank you, sir, for what you did to me."
Yeah,
I'm thinking, oh, geez, I'm not packing. I'm with my family. This is not a
yeah.
good situation. I've never had a problem, and maybe some of that's because I always treated them with respect, and a lot of them said that too. Thank you for treating me like a human being, and they even the ones I busted and put in segregation, put in the hole, as we say. They knew that I was just doing my job and it wasn't personal. And they would say, "You were right, Morales. I was an idiot back then, and I'm doing good now. I got a job, I got a family, I got a home." And they kind of give me an update. And I said, "Good, that's good, man. Right on. Keep on. Keep the faith. Don't stop."
That's good stuff right there, because I work with juvenile probationers right now, and like I was telling you guys, I'm a therapist by trade, but what I see is the gang lifestyle around here seems to be more enticing than going to school and getting a job, or being respectful to your adults, or to the parents. And I mean, it's really bad here. Like I didn't understand the severity until I came to work over here, and that's why I was asking you. Obviously, if you see like the gang tattoos, like I had this kid, he displayed a crown on the top of his hand, and I was thinking, that's some kind of gang, that what the Latin Kings, right? The crown, that the Latin Kings.
Hmm.
Well, you can see a lot of them. They start to get the gang tattoos, and they start to dress like the gangs do and stuff. I wanted to ask you guys: is the colors as much as it was in the early '90s, or has the color thing kind of faded away on the street? Do they still click together with the colors, or do they have they kind of faded away?
Like, what do you mean
Well,
by colors? Like, you
yeah,
mean like
go
the
ahead.
Bloods and the Crips, or I mean,
Well,
what do
yeah,
you?
like each set has a different color that they dress as. Like I think the Latin Kings are like yellow, or there's a brown set, there's a black and white. There's all
Mhm.
different kind of colors to represent your set. I was just wondering if that is still a thing, as y'all know, or if that's something that has kind of faded away in time.
No, they still use it. The colors, like in that sense, like to represent a certain sector of whatever, depending on the gangs, yeah, they do, and they do use the tattooing now. I will tell you, you know, if a person, anybody, has a gang tattoo, it's because they're part of that gang. I mean, tattoo artist, if I go to a tattoo artist and I'm like, "Hey, can you?" I show them the picture of this, and it's an affiliation, and everybody knows. I mean, the tattoo artists, they know which tattoos are affiliated or could possibly be affiliated. A lot of the tattoo artists won't even tattoo me. Why? Because those gangs use specific tattoo artists that do that. And it's just a set, code tattoo artists, that they're not going to do those types of tattoos, unless unless they're part of the gang, or or whatever. 'Cause they're not going to do it, because of what can come of it. You're tattooing somebody that isn't, a gang member. They're going to want to know who that tattoo artist is, and then that tattoo artist will have, a lot to say, as to why they used that. I mean, so the copyright to those type of things, isn't lightly in the gangs. I mean, from my experience at TDCJ, and just being around the officers that were in the unit, in the gang unit that we had. Yeah, so if the youth are already tattooed, and it is a tat that it's, yeah, they're in the gang.
Okay.
They're in the gang.
Okay. Gabe?
Yeah, if I could just kind of piggyback on that, what I see a lot of times is that they will wear the colors, especially at like funerals, parties, gang parties, safe places. Now, I'll give the example of the Seattle and King County gang unit. Now, when the gang units are out, and they know what hours these guys are out, which is usually right after school to like midnight to when the parties and stuff start ending, and so they know if the gang unit is out, they won't wear the colors because it attracts attention. And
Right.
so they're really they're really good at wearing neutral colors, and they know
Right.
what days. I believe it was like Monday and Tuesdays the gang unit had days off, and so that's when they wear the colors again. You see them flying everywhere. But then in the afternoons to through evening, a lot of times you didn't see the colors. Didn't mean there wasn't gang violence, but they knew they were being watched a lot more closely, and it's just tracking unneeded attention. They might get pulled over and have a gun on them, that kind of thing, get a probation or parole
Yeah.
violation. So it's kind of interesting to me. Back in the day before there were gang units, when the movie Colors came out, and
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
lot of these gang movies, it was like a big fad. All the kids wanted to do it, but also a lot of them found out, hey, you might get shot by the other side. And so I think I hate to use the word wannabes, because wannabes are gonna be if we don't do something about it. I don't really like that word, but a lot of the kids were kind of experimenting with the gangs. You know, Found out, hey, these guys are serious about this. The guys are really, really into it. And so maybe I shouldn't be. I used to tell my
Right.
kids when we go through California, um, you couldn't wear red or blue. Dad, we're not gang members. I said, I know you're not mules. I'm not I'm not concerned about that. What I'm worried about is other people who don't know you that might think you're a gang member and shoot at you. And it happens all the time. We had in Yakima some Washington State Cougar fans just coming back from games. These guys are college students, don't have any interest in gangs, but because they're wearing the red, the Sureños, the other side, shot at them. And the same thing with like Dodgers fans, if you like the Dodgers,
Yeah. The blue.
and
Yeah.
wearing a blue hat, you don't even have to be from LA. If the other side thinks, hey, you're a Sureño or a Crip or whatever particular gang is claiming that in your neighborhood, they may shoot at you. So colors are still a factor. I think it's just changed a little bit, the dynamics.
Mhm.
Okay. Um. So, let me ask you this as well. You said you're up there, or you lived in Seattle. Um. I was talking with Karla before you got on panel about college campuses becoming more prevalent with drug dealing. Do you believe that it's more of the pipeline from the cartels, or do you think that that's just mainstream media hyping that up?
Well, almost all the drugs that are coming into America are coming in from Mexico now. That wasn't always the case, but right now, fentanyl is, in particular, is being flooded into the United States. They're even sprinkling it in marijuana. So, I tell people, they're like, hey, I don't do hard drugs. Well, hey, you still might get OD'd if you don't know where that product came from. They're putting in everything, and So yeah, they're pushing different pills. A lot of people may say, "Hey, I'm not a heroin addict. I don't do needles, that kind of thing." Well, they'll put them in painkillers, Percocets, fake Percocets and stuff. And kids are ODing all over America. A lot of them on college campuses. You hear about it all the time. They have parties. Somebody says, "Hey, I don't feel good. Hey, take one of these. This will make you feel better." And I remember that happening back in the 70s and stuff. Somebody might have a bad trip or whatever they call it, but rarely did you hear about somebody, ODing and dying. Now
Right,
it is
right.
very, very common.
And that leads me to the next question. We were also talking about the Idaho 4, and I had briefly spoke to you about this on the phone. And you know, there had been many conspiracy theories where that was a drug house, that was a trap house, that was a house where they stashed guns and dope and, money. How common would that be? And would they use a knife as a hit?
You mean the cartels? No, no, not in my experience. Most of the cartels use weapons, firearms. Uh, I think that's a good excuse for the defense attorney side to say, hey, throw it off the blame off on somebody else. But I'm pretty sure they have their suspect. Of course, he still has to get a fair and impartial trial. But I think they're just grasping for anything they can right now. I haven't heard from anything. Of course, law enforcement can't speak about active cases, but um, usually they would put out an APB for a drug cartel member. That has happened in other cases. That has gone into a certain trailer or residence and massacred people, and that the individual dealing drugs. I believe it was even I want to say a teacher back in North Carolina. It was a teacher, I believe, if I remember right, and he was dealing drugs and stuff. I'm sure on campus too, and in the community, and the drug cartels took care of him. So, it's not impossible, but usually they use firearms. First of all, that's the big signal to me that this was not drug cartel involved. Um, I haven't heard anything on the grapevine. Like I said, that particular agency investigating it can't speak of it, but I'm in contact with Idaho law enforcement, and I'm pretty sure some other people not actively involved in the case would have said something about, hey, we think it might be drug cartels involved, and no such thing has occurred. So I pretty much count that out. There's a lot of signs
Mhm.
to me that say, that was not the case in this case. Although we have, it used to be that the drug cartels were only killing people down in Mexico. And they still are, even tourists. It used to be the tourist areas were off limits. That's no longer the case. And it used to be that they thought that to kill somebody on this side would bring too much scrutiny of their operations and law enforcement investigations. However, now we're seeing too that they're doing hits on this side of the border, especially along the border, down where you're at in Texas, Arizona, San Diego. They just had a big hit of a drug cartel guy not too long ago, a major guy, major figure, who was killed there on the San Diego U.S. side. So it does happen. I just don't see it happening in this particular case, the quadruple
Right.
homicide.
Well, Carla and I had covered the Bundy case a couple weeks ago, and you and I had talked about the Bundy case. Can you share a little bit about what you said about the individual that he left alive, the blind person,
Yeah,
the
that's
victim?
kind of a good story or crazy story. I don't know how you put it, but my dad had a roommate who's living with him back there in the time of Ted Bundy when they didn't know who was doing all these killings, and she stated that she dated Ted Bundy, and this was his my dad's roommate's girlfriend. And so I was like, wow, so how come he didn't kill you like the other girls? Well, she was blind. You could see, her eyes
Uh,
uh, were not, like a normal person's eyes.
right.
And she said, well, I I can explain that. You see, he would cut the heads off. Hopefully, this is not too graphic for your audience, but
Fine, that's
this is
fine.
all. Yeah, this all can be researched. It's
I've
not.
showed a lot of graphic stuff. They can handle
Okay,
it.
okay, good. Because I say this is pretty terrible, horrible. But he would cut the heads off his victims. Several of his victims were beheaded, and then he would go back to where he hid the bodies and have sex with the dead body, with the heads watching him have necrophilia with the dead bodies. And she said she was aware of that, and I think he had just been caught. So all this stuff was coming out like that, stories of the of the necrophilia. And I was like, well, how come he left you alive? She said, well, I'm blind, you see. I wouldn't be able to see him doing that to me in the afterworld. And me and my brother were listening to her, and just like our jaws dropped, like, wow, that is a crazy explanation, but it makes sense,
Yeah,
in a crazy, twisted way.
yeah.
So yeah, I interviewed John Liebert, who was the psychologist on the Ted Bundy case. He also did the Atlanta murders. Um, that were down there. They had like 30 young black men that were killed by Wayne Williams, who ended up being the suspect and is still currently incarcerated for that. But he also did some work on the Green River case. I also knew some of the victims uh, in that case.
What was that one about?
So
I mean, I've seen that one on YouTube, but I really can't remember. It was wasn't he like he would pick up prostitutes? Is that the one?
yes, Gary Ridgway. Yes,
Okay.
they think I think Gary Ridgway and Ted Bundy. I don't know if they had a contest or what, but I think they were good, both good for like 50 murders apiece. But a lot of
Wow.
investigators think it could be double that, which is pretty crazy. But Ted Bundy, yeah, Ann Rule worked with the Seattle Police Department. She wrote a book, The Stranger Beside Me, and Ted Bundy actually was working on um, the case, finding out how much cops knew. It was a hotline, I think, a rape hotline or sexual assault hotline, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but he was right next to her. That's why she called the book "The Stranger Beside Me." So they were both taking these calls and trying to, help all these poor girls. And all the time, he's finding out more information about how the cops are working that case, that he was responsible for all these missing women. Gary
Wow.
Ridgway he worked at a truck um, manufacturing company. I believe he painted them, and so that's one of the ways um, they found DNA, but also paint evidence on some of the victims and some of the crime scenes that came off his clothing and body. But he also was, yeah, he was picking up prostitutes along I-99, which is called the Strip, the highway there by the airport in Seattle. That's where the majority of them were picked up. And yeah, um, his thing was to pick them up, choke them out, and then have sex with them after he killed them also. So uh, pretty two very terrible individuals. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of crazies out there. Those are
Yes.
the only two that we know of. There's that's the scary part. Every time I hear about these missing people, I'm like, it could be this. It could be your neighbor. The person next to you. You never know.
Carla, I have a question for you. Would Ted Bundy be considered crazy?
Yeah.
Blondie asked that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he was a psychopath narcissist is what he was. With Ted Bundy, we know that even though he didn't was never a lawyer, pretended to be a lawyer, and messed up his own case, but yeah, definitely he would be considered a psychopath, a narcissist,
Okay.
um, you know. So yeah, he's
Exactly.
definitely fits all of those. He checks off all of those boxes, for us. And the scary part about it is the narcissism part, because they have no empathy. They do not care, that they are hurting you. They do not see their victims as human, because if they did, it would be very hard to do some of the stuff that we do. I mean, that's what keeps us all from killing each other.
Right.
Is that you
Right.
see that person as, a son, a daughter, a mom, a dad, grandparent, like we have the ability, right? And so they do not, they just don't care, so.
Mhm. He was
Okay.
incredibly intelligent, and
Hmm.
I am told too uh, that he was very charismatic. And so, I mean, he wasn't a bad looking guy. Um, he was, because he was narcissistic, thought he could get away with it, and he did for a long time. He actually, I've seen some films where he actually is kind of like, I believe it was the prosecuting attorney actually kind of daring him. Yeah, yeah, you finally got me, but guess what? I'm not done with you yet. I'm not done playing
Yeah.
games yet. And he escaped several times from custody. I mean, he's incredibly intelligent, but still crazy. His mind did not work like the normal person. And I think the same way with Gary Ridgway. You have to be pretty smart to do some of the things they did to cover their tracks so well for so long. But that's the problem. All of them get cocky eventually and get caught, almost all of them.
Hmm.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, and even in the Ted Bundy case, the uh, judge that sentenced him, at the end, told him, that he, it was kind of made that it was unfortunate that he chose this side, because he would have been made a good lawyer. I mean, he would have wanted, for him to, be in front of him, doing cases. I mean, he was very intelligent in that aspect. I mean, he was able to persuade the judge to there at the end, to give him more lighting, more this, more that. I mean, he
Right.
knew how to read, and his comprehensive, because you have to have the ability to read and comprehend the law. And that's hard. It is hard because of the lingo and the words that you think mean this, actually, when they're put in the books, it doesn't mean that. And I mean, and he was able to read and comprehend the law, to a certain degree, because there, when arguing, he kind of messed himself up over him getting life, or the death penalty, because he wanted to take on his own case. And it was very insulting to him and his intelligence, and he didn't want to take on the deal that they had made for him. And then he argued with the judge about his attorney, and got his attorney to step
Okay.
down, and then he was co-counsel, he was the counselor. I mean, so he was brilliant in that aspect, on how he was able to manipulate something that was in his favor. But even though it was in his favor, it made him look bad. So he didn't want that. So it's just very interesting. I like the psychology part of Ted Bundy, and how he thought, think and operate. And from the things that I know of him, I'm so intrigued that you have access to people that
Right.
actually talk to him. And oh, but that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, when Gabe
Hmm.
told me that, I was like, wow, it's like
Hmm.
amazing. I have a question for you, Gabe. It says it's always fascinated me why there's hardly any black serial killers. Why they're usually a white man. Well, I wanna comment on that. Have you heard of the Grim Sleeper? I think it is, or
Mm.
the Grim Sleeper, Reaper, something. The African American individual that was killing prostitutes.
Hmm.
Um, I think it was in California. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's been a lot of, theories and stuff on, why does it seem like there's more white serial killers than any others? Well, there's more white people, at least until recent years. That's one reason why, numbers. But like I just stated when I came on, Wayne Williams was from Atlanta, and he was actually a DJ who would entice young black men to get in the music business, and was stated to have killed and raped a lot of them. So there is Richard Ramirez that did a true crime story on Richard Ramirez, Hispanic. So it does happen. There are non-white serial killers. Um, um, I can't
So
remember the
well,
guy's name right
here's
now. Charles Ng. Charles Ng was Asian, Chinese, and I dealt with him at Folsom Prison. He was a part of he and his partner were killing people and torturing them in Calaveras County in Northern California. So yeah, I don't think it's you know that it doesn't happen with other races. I just think maybe the white cases get more publicity, or they stand out more just because there's more of them, and they're until recent years the majority of America has been white. So I mean,
Right.
there's a lot of different reasons and theories.
yeah,
Right.
I think theories that where we were taught in school is going to be how different cultures interact with one another. So typically, the African American community, their culture, right? They don't support things. They talk about things. That culture talks a lot to each other. Where a Caucasian population, they really don't. They keep everything inside. They bottle everything inside. And Mexicans do the same thing. Hispanics, we really don't really talk about it. We really suppress it. So what I mean by all of that is typically, but not always, right? In the African American culture, if I'm down and depressed and I go and I tell my sister, hey, I'm down and depressed, depressed about that. You need to get over him, blah, 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 blah. And blah, blah, blah. They talk a lot, and it gets people thinking like, oh, yeah, 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 it gets people out of their minds, you know, it, Caucasian culture, you see a lot of, you talk to people. I haven't talked to my mom in 12 years. Well, oh my God, like that's unheard of. What do you mean you don't talk? Well, no, I just don't talk to him, and it's because they've suppressed something, was deep down. And that has a lot to do with how our mind later on develop and things like that. But it's not necessarily a race issue. There's serial killers, from all different races, all of the time. Um, but yeah, I do think it's more of what the press wants to convey to the people. Because if we were to say that there was a black serial killer, we know he's African American, he's out there raping kids and or whatever it is, it is gonna throw in an alert, everywhere. People are going to be more
Right.
scared. So the press, I feel like, they suppress some of that information and we find out about it later. Like we do have killers here. I know of one, the eyeball killer. We talked about him. I never said what his race was, but because to me, I don't really, I mean, I just see people, but
Right. Right.
he is African American and he is incarcerated at TDC, so.
Well, you know what's
Yeah,
interesting
I
to
think it's
me?
something that needs studied more. I mean, it's very interesting to me. Absolutely, a lot of it has to do more with culture than race and economic. With the
Yeah.
changing, and of course, a lot of people say not much has changed. Uh, and they have some points too that it seems like a lot of things haven't changed as fast as I thought. Growing up under Cesar Chavez and Martin Luther King, I thought, hey, everything would be nice and equal by now in the future. And we know absolutely that's not the case. We still
No.
have a lot of problems. In fact, maybe America is becoming more polarized than it was back in the 60s and 70s. In some ways, I feel it's just terrible the way the politics is now, and how people treat each other, just so mean, and just it seems like there's a lack of respect anymore. We can't disagree civilly anymore. It seems like people want to attack people, and
Yeah.
it's interesting to me. I think it needs studied more. Um, Definitely, it's a good question. Uh, and I agree with you. I think a lot of it times it's suppressed, or um, news agency agendas also. What they feed to us and what they don't feed to us is also a play of it. I remember when Walter Cronkite used to be on the news and said that's the way it was. You knew that's what he didn't put his opinion in there. He just told the news. And now you
Yeah.
got I won't name the two networks. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about. But one swings totally one way, one swings totally the other way. And how do you know what they're telling you is the truth or even near the truth? How to sort
Exactly.
it out?
Exactly. You know, I was about to say, most of these serial killers that I've been researching and, watching, the prostitution or people that are homeless or live that vagrant lifestyle, they're more at risk to be victims of serial killers based on their lifestyle, wouldn't you say?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Even truck driver. I mean, I was looking at some of the videos on YouTube. There've been serial killer truckers, and I never even knew that. I never even knew that. You know, so it's very interesting to me that there's so many different dynamics, but it's like at the end, what makes these individuals just give up all humanity and turn the other way? Have you figured that out, Gabe?
No, that's $1 million question, brother. Yeah, let me know when you find the answer to that, because yeah, we
Yeah,
could probably solve a lot of the problems in the world. Um,
yeah,
but no, absolutely, human trafficking is as big as ever. It seems to go in cycles. I remember back in the 60s and 70s when there was pimps that looked like the stereotype pimp. I mean, pimp hat, pink, suit. I mean, pink, levitated shoes. I mean, strolling down the sidewalk, looking like Huggy Bear from Starsky and Hutch. But
yeah.
it's kind of interesting because then I remember how a lot of the girls, and like I said, my brother's a pimp, so I've given courses on this too. There's different kinds of pimps, but then a lot of the girls, I remember, stopped using pimps because hey, the pimp's taking all their money. They're like, hey, I'll work on my own. I don't need him. I don't need no man to tell me what to do and take all my money and beat me and treat me bad. And so a lot of them stopped doing that. But then guys like the Green River Killer came out, Gary Ridgway, and then I saw the pimps coming back. And then there was a lot of targeting of the pimps by the vice squads. And then I seen them kind of go away again. And it went to, we also had the internet. And so they had backpage.com was going on. And so there was maybe still pimping, but it changed. You know what I mean? It no
Yeah.
longer was just out there on the street and, hey, I'll hook you up with this girl for, such and such price. It became more covert, I think, kind of went underground for a while. And
Yeah.
now with the decimation of police forces cutting back, one of the first things that goes is like the gang squad, the vice squad, all these special squads, and these pimps and the working girls know this. I remember being in the jail one time and I was in the female section and I was on the elevator and one female prostitute tells the other, hey girl, where you been? I ain't seen you in a while. He goes, you need to be out there on Thursday night on the strip in Tacoma. The vice squad ain't out there on Thursday nights, girl. And they were saying, I was like, excuse me, they're just talking out in the open right next to me like I wasn't there. But they know. They know, just like the gang members know when the gang squad is out and not, so do the prostitutes know when the vice squad is out or not. And they also know when the threat level is higher, where they might need a pimp to protect them, and when the security level has lowered, you know.
Right.
It's just, I don't know, it kind of, it's very interesting to me. Some things are still the same, but some things have changed in that business.
This one comes from Rondi. She said, we had 6 women in Portland and a guy in custody who were murdered living on the street near where I live. They basically got no coverage until some locals brought attention to it. Have y'all heard of that?
No, I
Mhm.
haven't. But that doesn't surprise me. And I honestly think that that's why TikTok got banned. I mean, TikTok is gonna go away because people are talking and people are bringing attention to things. Even like your podcast. How much you've done. Of the Idaho 4 and all of the details. That I Marty. Come up. That. And there was even another podcast that actually got somebody exonerated. So people are talking, people are noticing things, and and it just goes back to, it's so unfortunate, but the news doesn't always tell us everything that is exactly going on. I mean, they're just not, until they're forced, like she was saying, until locals started getting involved, making a big old ruckus of things, does then the media, pay attention, to that. So,
Have you heard of the ladies in Portland area, Oregon, that have been murdered? Gabe, have you
No,
followed
I
that case
haven't,
at
and I'm
all?
usually especially on Seattle. I check the Seattle news and the Hawaii news almost every
Yeah,
day. But Portland too, I know a lot of law enforcement and workers, intervention workers with youth and stuff down there. So no, I haven't heard that. I do know that Portland and Seattle and a lot of the West Coast cities are having a lot of problems with homelessness.
right.
Um, and some of the problems that come along with that, drug use and alcoholism and garbage and you know hate to be gross, but feces in the street and that kind of thing. But yeah, I haven't heard about that, but it doesn't surprise me because it just, I don't know. Sometimes maybe I'm just getting old. I tell people maybe I'm just getting old and grumpy, but it's I, maybe I turned into my grandpa, But it sure seems like the world's sure gone crazy. I don't know. Maybe it's just me getting old.
I don't know either because I mean I feel the same way. It's like, when you're younger, you hear all this stuff that's going on in your generation, and you're like, I don't have time to listen to all that, And then you get older, and then that's all you kind of focus on is the bad news that you hear, and you're like, man, it's gotten so bad. It wasn't this the biggest quote I've ever heard. It wasn't this bad when I was
Growing up, yeah.
growing up. Yeah, and I grew up in the early '90s. I graduated high school around then, and it was wild then. But and that's when the L.A. gangs were really popping off, or the Crips and the Bloods and all that. With the
Hmm.
in the early '90s. So I always was intrigued by that. I was into gangster rap. I was, I wore my little Raiders hat and all that. Wanted to be a gangster from Cali, but um, was it really? I mean, you have firsthand experience. Is it really as what the media portrays, or is it worse? Like in the early
Well,
'90s?
Martin, I when I teach my classes, I tell people this. It was bad back then, but it was different. They didn't have these clips with 100 rounds, able to take out 20, 30 people at a time. It was different. There was deaths back then, and they say that the murder rate actually was higher. I remember in Seattle that the murder rate was very high in 1993, and that's when the Crips and Bloods had gone up to Seattle and really got the local kids into the Crips and Bloods. And we also had a lot of gangster disciples, kids who didn't want to join Crips and Bloods, that were from some really tough neighborhoods in Seattle and didn't like these LA kids trying to tell them what to do. And Seattle has the biggest contingent of gangster disciples that I know west of the Mississippi, and it was directly because they have hundreds, probably over 1,000 gangster disciple members in Seattle today that never been to Chicago. It was mostly because they did not like these Crips and Bloods coming up and tell them what to do. It's interesting dynamics, and I remember too that the murder rate. Now I may be off on this, but I want to say it was something like 84 homicide victims in 93. And then they had talked about recent years until COVID, they had another surge. But I remember, let's say 10 years ago, they said, hey, the murder rate is really low. It's the lowest it's been in years. And I would tell people in my class, yeah, I think there's a reason for that. It's called Harborview Medical Center. Harborview Medical Center is one of the best trauma centers in the world. They had a lot of doctors that worked in Vietnam that took care of, you know, gaping bullet wounds and stuff, and now they got a new generation, but it is known all over the world, all over the United States in particular, as being one of the best trauma centers. I tell people, 50 Cent, he got shot 9 times and lived. Back in the 60s and 70s, homeboy would have been dead, but he was able to live because they got to him in time. If they can get
Yeah.
to you within a few minutes, they can keep anybody alive. I've seen people and cops have told me this. That guy was dead, flatline. They brought him back. So yeah, the statistics sometimes don't tell the whole story. So yeah, the murder rate has gone down, but does that mean the assaults have gone down? And with less police, is because there's less assaults? Is that really true, or is it less people reporting them?
Right.
Because there's less police to take that report and respond. There's a lot of, I said, statistics are good. Don't get me wrong, but I hear a lot of people talking about evidence based and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, it depends because those stats can be twisted and there's a lot of things that can impact them. So you got to sometimes take those statistics with a grain of salt.
Well,
Yeah,
and I
because
think too,
during COVID, everybody would die of COVID, even a gunshot wound.
You're right.
but
Yeah.
and I think too, we have to like stop and really, whenever you're analyzing data, right? Because that's kind of what you were saying. Whenever we're analyzing data, there has to be a clear marker between correlation and causation. So we have to know the difference between those two terms. So I'll explain them really quickly, and how it was explained to me from a professor. Uh, so correlation and causation. Whenever I say it's A, B happened and they caused C. So, we can't say that the sales of ice cream goes up in the summertime when compared to sales in the wintertime. Another thing that goes up is the criminals. More crime happens in the summertime than in the wintertime. So we can't say that the ice cream is causing the crime, because that would be like all of these toddlers are going out and killing these people. That's causation, and that, you can't do that, right? There is a correlation. There is a correlation between ice cream sales, crime rate. And probably one of the things that correlates them is the weather. You're not really going to have a criminal out there in the rain, in the snow, committing crimes because they don't want to get wet. They don't want, it's more going to be in the winter, in the
Right.
summertime, right? So
Right.
correlation and
Absolutely.
causation, two totally different things. So we have to, like, whenever you're looking at data, you really have to just ask yourself, what are the numbers telling me? Is it just a correlation or a causation? And so I think a lot of the thing, and then another theory out there as to why is the crime going down now. Well, if we stop and we think about it, what has gone up? Our access to media has gone up. So homes now, every home down this street has a camera, a ring camera. Everything that's happening is getting recorded on somebody's ring camera. We didn't have that back then. We didn't
No.
have all of this technology. So as technology soars up, probably the crime rate is going to come down, because criminals now know, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be seen. So if I want to get a prostitute, not that I'm in the business of getting prostitutes, but if I wanted to get a prostitute or an escort, hey, you got to pay Apple Pay. They got Apple Pay. They got Cash App. There is a way to monitor who you are. See, back then they would just pull up and, hey, get in my car. Who did you go with? Who knows? Now when you want an escort, typically, not always, but you have to have that credit card. They do credit card, they do transactions, and what's on there? Your name, your social security, like, they can track, right? So, you know, the criminals now have to come up with ways to evade that. And as technology goes up, it's getting difficult and more difficult and more difficult. Does it still happen? Of course it does, but it's getting a little bit difficult. If a criminal sees that they are on a ring camera and a spotlight is on them, they're less likely to break into your car because they're on camera. you know. So that's also an interesting, theory, but again, it's not a causation. I'm not saying that because technology is going up, it's causing crime to go down. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there is a possible correlation between the two.
Right, right. Thank you for
Absolutely,
that.
technology has changed the game, but also I think you have regional differences. I've done several interviews with David Rose. He runs a newscast in Seattle and has his own crime show called the Spotlight. And we were talking about the Kia boys. These are boys that are going around with little, you know, what do you call them? Uh, they can electronically very quickly. They don't even need to hotwire it. They just push this little thumb drive in, and boom, and the car starts, and they take off. And so these guys are caught on camera a lot of times. Uh, but it doesn't prevent them because there was no repercussions. They lowered the penalties for youth, for juveniles. They built
Yeah,
a $50 million, I believe, new youth detention facility in Seattle. It sits empty because they said it's cruel and unjust to lock up a kid, even if he commits murder.
yeah,
And so it's really kind of crazy, especially on the West Coast. I'm very familiar. I'm not as familiar with Texas, although I know they don't play too many games down in Texas. Don't mess with Texas, right? But it's interesting because property crimes are out of control on the West Coast. You see them go in mobs and steal clothes and take everything they can. And the security guys, they're told don't engage with them because they might hurt you or something. And
yeah.
then the police are told that it's a property crime, it's low level. We don't even have enough officers to respond to violent felony crimes, let alone these low level misdemeanor property crimes. And no, not only that, these kids are told by the adults who run these rings how much to steal before you are knocked up to the next level as far as
Right,
penalty pays. I think
Mhm.
it's like over $1,000. Then you might do a day in juvenile or a week in
right,
juvenile, and other than that, they're not going to do nothing to you. And so these kids know this. They can steal like 20 cars before the judge says, "Now I'm going to give you a month in juvenile detention." And by then it's too late. Now they have gravitated into carjackings, maybe shooting somebody in the process of this. Now it's a murder charge. It's no longer a joyride, and it's
Mhm.
out of control. I hear people all the time talk about they're moving out of Seattle, Portland, LA, the Bay Area, because and a lot of them, like myself, believe in a lot of youth make dumb mistakes given second chances, but we're not talking about just second or third chances. We're talking about 20 chances before
right.
anything happens to them. And I think we're sending the wrong message, and that's why I told David Rose, we're sending the wrong message to kids when we don't do anything until they do it that many times, because we're teaching them crime does pay.
Right, and by that time, it's a habit. It's almost an addictive rush. You get that rush. You get that pleasure from stealing a car. That's basically what you do all day long is go looking for that pleasure. You're gonna go, and you know that there's little consequence to it. Yeah, I mean, it's terrible down here too. I mean, it's hard to send people. It's hard to send juvenile to, well, it's called TJJD, but it's very difficult to send them away for that, because like you said, there's a lot of individuals to say that just cruel and unusual punishment. I wanted to mention
Yeah,
something else
I
if
don't
you
think they
thought.
need to go to prison, for 10 years for something like that. But yeah, some kind of repercussions and progressive disciplinary. That's one
Yeah,
thing we in corrections. You know, you do it once, okay. Well, maybe you might get a warning. You do it twice, okay. Now you're going to get a little stiffer penalty, and it goes up each time you do it. Not nothing happens each time you do it. That's the wrong message. So that now you're responsible. Maybe the first time it was peer pressure, whatever. You didn't even want to be there. And you got in the car. But after a while, it's kind of like, hey, wake up here. And sometimes you got to give them a wake up call. I've
yeah,
also seen where putting them in detention sometimes saves them from themselves because they go get in a car crash and burn and take a bunch of people with them. sometimes they need that time out. Sometimes they're using drugs and alcohol. They need to dry out, even though they can sometimes get it on the inside.
Yeah.
Um, but sometimes I've even had guys tell me, hey man, you're back again. Yeah, man, I need a vacation from the street, Morales. They would even joke about it. They
I've
need a
heard
little break
adults say that
because
too.
now they're
Yeah.
getting 3 meals a day. They're sleeping. They have a routine. There's some there's some order to their life that they haven't had for months. And yeah, so uh, I don't know.
Well, here's a question for either one of you. You were talking about the Norteño and the Sureño gangs in California, and I know that they have those here too. But I really am not well versed. Hear me out. Like the Norteños, are those the Crips, and the Sureños are the Bloods? Is that right or is that wrong? How is that
Yeah,
broken up?
it's totally different thing. In California, you have Crips and Bloods, which are predominantly black gangs, although they do have other races in them. With Sureños and Norteños, it's predominantly Hispanics, but they do have other races in them also. Um, but that's like 95%, or more, usually. Um, and so the Norteños are from Northern California. That's what norteños means in Spanish, northerners.
Right, right.
Sureños from Southern California. And basically these were formed back in the mid 1970s and late 70s after the Mexican Mafia and West Familia prison gangs were being locked down in security housing units. And
Mhm.
basically they got these farm teams, these minor leaguers, to work for them while they were locked up in the hole and to conduct business for them out in the prison yards. So they morphed even further where these norteños became organized. And you had what was called the Northern Structure, Nuestra Raza. And then you joined that. That was like a junior prison gang, uh, a filter group for joining the West Familia. And then they decided, hey, you can be a norteño and not be part of the northern structure, or you could be just a northerner if you're from Northern California, but you still back us up when there's a riot. So it was kind of like different levels. The same thing with the Sureños. You had the Mexican Mafia, then you had the Sureños, then you had the Southern United Raza, which became kind of like the farm team for the Mexican Mafia. And then you had Sureños, and you had just Southerners. It means you're from Southern California, maybe you don't even gangbang, but because you grew up around guys in your high school or your neighborhood where something goes down, you got to back them up. So that's kind of the way it works. Totally different than Crips and Bloods, which is
Okay.
predominantly an LA County thing, South Central Los Angeles, and then it moved into other parts of LA County, and then to San Diego and other parts of California and across the United States. So yeah, totally different thing.
Okay. I know here in Texas we have a high recidivism with the offenders. I mean, they get out on parole, they're back within probably, whenever the parole officer get tired of them pretty much. They give them chance after chance after chance, and eventually they're sent back. Does California exhibit that as well at the high recidivism rate at Folsom
Oh,
when you were there?
yeah. Yeah, they built. I opened up New Folsom. They built all kinds of new prisons during the 1980s and 90s as a result of the drug war, predominantly, in my opinion. Um, and I know the show is not about the prison industrial complex, but that's what a lot of people called it. And we like doubled our prison population during those years. And then it's interesting because so many prisoner rights organizations were fighting for a lot of these guys, saying, hey, you know what? This guy over here who's Caucasian, he got caught with powder cocaine, he got probation. I got caught with, 8, 9, 10 rocks, and I'm doing 20 years in prison. What's up with that? Where's the equal justice there? And I think they had a very good point. Then COVID came along and they emptied the institutions. I mean, literally, it's like half. Before COVID and after, if you look at it in California, it's like half the population. COVID did more for criminal justice reform. I tell people all the time that anything else. You know, the Black Lives Matter movement, and nothing else came close to the COVID. Get them out of here. We don't want to get sued type of thing. Which kind of tell me, well, wait a minute, they weren't dangerous enough to remain locked up. You didn't want to build more prisons for these guys. You know, you're double housing them together. Now you don't want them to get COVID from each other. Uh, you know, you want to have that 6 feet or whatever, 8 feet or whatever they said.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, but yeah, all of a sudden, oh, Shazam, you know, let them all out, and they're no longer a menace to society. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to me that how that happened, and so I believe that there was a lot of people who were unjustly locked up for way longer than they should have for the crime they committed. But you also, in that floodgate of letting them loose, I think they let out a lot of dangerous individuals now that are out on the streets, which I think explains in part, at least in California, and it's also happened along the West Coast. Like I said, we're most familiar with the criminal justice systems. That is, I think, had a big part in the increase in crimes.
Okay.
I think for me, the only thing that I want to add to that is going to be, at least for Texas, Texas is trying. They are trying, but they just don't have enough funding for to teach offenders, life skills, to teach them something, like how are they going to survive once they come out? How can we prevent them from coming in? Well, if the offender doesn't have it, something like, gaining some knowledge of something, they're going to go right back to what they know. But there's just not enough, I think, skills trainings and things like that, because I mean, I feel like, if they were to put more money into that, which they're not, but if they were to put more money into that to actually teach offenders, so if you were poor and that's what led you to, bring money so you could just money to your mom so you could just feed people, but you had to do crime in order to, to get those basic needs met. But if you had like a license to be a welder and you knew you could make all of this money, maybe when you left prison you would be a welder, but they're not going to, they're not going to. But it's interesting to kind of to think about it that way. I mean, I know they TDC at least is putting some counseling in place, but they just need more.
Well,
Absolutely, absolutely,
the
absolutely. I
unfortunate
couldn't agree
is,
more.
yeah, the unfortunate is that, you're worth more being incarcerated than to have an empty prison. The state gets more money for each offender, so it's better to have them full more than have them, half empty or not even existing at all. We have a comment here that says, "Do gangs join forces and kind of combine with other gangs?"
Of course they do.
Yeah.
Of course, there was a riot uh, whenever there was this officer that treated, again, they tell the officers, if you're ever going to be working as an officer, to remain consistent, with them, to, just because and doesn't mean that you should, so officers do have a lot of power over the offenders. And there was a particular officer that got cocky, that, wasn't just fair treatment, and he wasn't doing that. And of course they did. They combined together, and we had an incident at Chow. It's usually when there's incidents in the prison system, and to get that officer. And they will combine and join forces when it suits them. So, yeah, you see that all the time, and it's unfortunate, but yeah, it in the prison system. It's going to be, whatever's gonna get the means to get what they want,
Right.
so.
Well, Chad, if y'all have any questions for Mr. Morales or Karla, be sure to type it in the chat. We're going to continue talking a little bit more. Are you guys good on time, or you have
I
something
can go
else
a
to
little while
do?
longer. Sure,
Okay.
I can go a little longer.
Yeah.
All
Maybe,
right.
yeah, maybe 20 more minutes, 15, 20 more minutes.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I appreciate you being here, both of you. Um, as far as what we're talking about, it seems like two different worlds. Like even though I mean, I've worked in a prison before, never as a guard, just as a therapist, but I was in the dorms and everything else like that. It wasn't maximum security, it was a treatment farm. So, you know, but what you notice is that even in those treatment areas, you still have offenders programmed to be whatever farm they came from. If they came from maximum, they still were acting hardcore like they would be in the maximum security. They wouldn't change knowing that they were trying to get treatment to go home. It was hard to get individuals to see, hey, you don't need to be tattooing. You don't need to be, sneaking food. You don't need to be doing all this stuff that you do on the other units. You need to try to learn different tools because you're about to go home. I saw this one guy. He had third-degree burns because he snuck out some baked chicken from the from the chow hall, and they caught him in the hallway, and he's screaming and everything, and they stripped him, and his skin was basically peeling off because he had that hot baked chicken on his legs. And it's just crazy some of the extremes that people go to get stuff back to the dorms. Haven't y'all seen that or heard of that?
Yeah, and I think
Well,
TDC,
yeah.
has a responsibility because, poverty also exists when you're in the prison system, right? So if the offenders, if they don't have people putting money on their books, then they're poor. They don't have everything. I mean, the state of Texas, as far as the prison system, they're going to provide the very bare minimums, which does create chaos. So, in itself, in the way the commissary and all of that is put, it's I think it is the core reason why, we have offenders that are stealing chicken, or we have this. Because, I mean, if you're indigent in the prison system, how else are you going to survive? But if the commissary was not there, and the state of Texas wasn't making an income off of the commissary, and commissary just completely was not there, I don't know that we would have offenders doing all of this stuff, because if everybody had access to the same shampoo, and there was no other, and you couldn't purchase, you could have $1,000 on your books, but there's nothing to purchase. Everybody's doing the same. I mean, I think it would be, the culture would be a lot different. But the state of Texas needs to make money off of the offenders. I mean, the offenders bring in tons and thousands upon thousands of dollars into the prison system because of that. A fun fact that I just want to put out there real quick, and then I'm gonna be quiet. Did you guys know? Did you guys know this? It's a fun fact about TDC. So I went to Huntsville and I took a tour, and everything of Huntsville because it was just very fascinating to me. And I went to the graveyard, the prison graveyard. They have a graveyard. And when you die and you're indigent in the prison system and nobody claims your body, the offenders, they have a squad, right? They'll go out and they're going to bury you, but you are buried by your TTC number.
Yeah.
There's not a name. There's not hey, a birth date and a death date. There's nothing. It is a number. I was shocked by that whenever I was walking the prison, the little thing that they have, because it's nothing but numbers. And I was like, wow. To me, I was like, oh my gosh, that is so horrible. I felt so bad. We have, humans that are buried there that, I mean, it's just a number. You are just a number. So anyways, don't go to prison.
Yeah.
Don't be indigent.
Yeah.
just Do right, make good
Absolutely,
decisions, stay out of there, but
and I know your question, Martin, and I kind of went off a little bit on a tangent on that. I apologize.
It's okay.
Was
It's
about
okay. You are fine. You are great.
was about recidivism, and I absolutely agree with Karla. We have to give them some kind of life skills if we want to expect them to change their criminal behavior. I have seen a lot of individuals while they're incarcerated program very well. A lot of these people, like I said, you wouldn't think of them as being bad, such quote unquote bad people. Very Some of them very, very intelligent, just
Hmm.
got off into drug usage, did some crazy stuff. But then when they're straight and clear minded, they're very intelligent, a lot of them, and thoughtful and uh, just pretty decent human beings. But then the problem is a lot of times then they get released and they're supposed to have a release plan. Usually, what that release plan is, do you have anywhere to live? Do you have
Right.
anywhere we can send mail in case we need to call you back for court? I mean, very minimal. The release plans are are almost non-existent, and so we don't have any transitioning back to the community, and that's where I think corrections does the worst job, and why we see the revolving door because we don't have a good transitioning back to the community. I think it should be a requirement, especially when you go from high security, to have a step down program. How can
Yeah.
you cut somebody loose from 23-hour lockdown, a security housing unit where your whole life is controlled, when you can comb your hair, when you have access to comb, when you can brush your teeth, when you can shave, when you can take a shower, when you can have recreation, when you can eat? Your whole life is programmed, and then just cut them loose and saying, "Hey, this is your date. Here's your gate money out the gate. Good luck." Then
Yeah.
we wonder why we have such a high failure rate, you know.
Yeah.
But then,
Exactly.
and so, like I said, we should have these programs, and a lot of them I think are very, very well intended. But sometimes I was really kind of shocked. We had a drug diversion program, which I think is great for offenders. So if they go through drug court and they go through this drug diversion program, they can have that felony taken off their record,
Yeah.
which may prevent employment and housing and a whole lot of other things, right? So great program, great intentions. I know several of the judges that ran it for years, um, and they've had some good success stories. But I was kind of shocked sometimes when I screen offenders for the drug program and say, I think you'd be a good candidate for the drug program. Oh, don't send me there, Morales. I was like, you're not a drug charge. You're a drug user. I can tell just by looking at you. You got abscesses and that kind of stuff. And you're
Yeah.
tweaking. And
Yeah.
they're like, no, don't send me there. Don't send me there. They're like begging me, please don't send me there. I'm like, whoa, do you have an enemy there? No, all they do is talk about drugs there and try to sell me drugs, and that's all they do is use drugs and talk about drugs, and I'm trying to actually go clean. And I thought about it. Oh my God, what a better place for a dealer to hang out in one of those programs. You got all these junkies that are just barely getting
Yeah.
off it, and
Yeah.
probably haven't gone cold turkey all the way. And yeah, let's get them
Right.
hooked back on, feeling good again, get them back on the product. uh there's things like that. So it has to be monitored very closely. You can't just put anybody in there. You have to have good staff that are looking out for that kind of stuff, good officers, good. Anytime I pulled somebody out of that program, and I tell you, they did not like you removing somebody there, but I always had a lot of documentation on why. They're a known drug dealer. They're busted with drugs in possession. Multiple informants say this guy's dealing drugs in there, on and on and on. So I have my documentation. This guy does not belong in that program. So then it would allow the people who really wanted the program to function in there and to get through it and maybe be successful. So yeah, it's I tell you, these guys, for every we talked about when I first came on the technology, for everything we have to try to prevent them from doing something, they will come up with something to counteract it. So it's
Yeah.
a constant kind of like cat and mouse game. You got to constantly adjust for those type of
Yeah.
individuals because that is their life skills. That's the only life skills they know is surviving by doing whatever they have to do to make money, to become, that top dog in there, to have the most top ramen in their cell or whatever, to be the
Yeah.
biggest toughest guy in the institution with the
The
most
black
jokes and the
bag
biggest brain.
coffee, the
Absolutely.
good stuff, right?
Right.
We have a question. It said, did the NLR and Penny just go away or combine with other gangs? I don't know what NLR or Penny are.
Well, let me give a quick explanation. NLR is Nazi lowriders. They're out of California. P9 is Public Enemy number one. They're
Okay.
both predominantly white gangs. You have to be at least half white in the Nazi lowriders. I can't think of any P9 right now that are not white, although a DNA test, might say different. I always tell people it's interesting in these, some of these people that think they're all pure, and why would you want to be pure anything?
Yeah.
You're just setting yourself up for all kinds of chromosome problems. but anyways, uh, in all seriousness, the P9 and Nazi lawyers were two white prison gangs out of California predominantly, although they spread to other states, and they were underneath the control of the Aryan Brotherhood, which is the top dog. And so, yeah, often they would work together. Sometimes they're enemies. Uh, Neither one of them have totally gone away, although they both lost favor from the Aryan Brotherhood, which is still the top dog, even though they had multiple RICO cases against them and sent all their top leadership to the feds. They just recruit new ones amongst the Caucasian inmates, new leaders to fill that void. And often they'll come from groups like the Peni or Nazi lowriders or Fresniks or the barbarians. They have so many different new groups that spawn up every time you try to get rid of the Aryan Brotherhood. Then 10 more pop up. You know,
Yeah.
that maybe not be as they're not as powerful, but before when you only had one real main group, now you got all these groups. It's really hard to keep track of who's who anymore. So yeah, they didn't go away. In regards to the person who asked that question, they do
Okay.
sometimes combine forces. Sometimes they go against each other. It's constantly changing.
Okay. We have another question. It says, what percentage of those incarcerated do you see get their nose in the Bible? Does it seem to help with them being successful?
I'll let Karla take that
I
one.
think all Yeah, I think all offenders, not all, but some, they do. We got to give the offenders something to do, and if they choose to do the religious route and they, we have what's it called? Some of the churches that come in and give the offenders Bibles and things like that, are they successful? It depends on what you mean by successful. Does it keep them occupied? Yeah, it does. It does keep them occupied. Does it give them something to look forward to, some type of hope or, yeah, and we want that. We want that as a society. We want that. We want to provide those services to the offenders because, we can't just have not do anything and completely strip them of everything, because then it's be worse. So yeah, I mean, do we have offenders that, read the Bible? I mean, there's church among in the prisons, if they want to attend church services, and they are they've got to have, no I mean, there's certain criteria, right, to be eligible to go to church. So it gives them something to work towards. So if I'm a hot and I want to go to church because at church sometimes the churches they'll bring little goodies, for the people that are in there, and I want to have a cupcake or I want to be participating. I get to be somebody special. I get to come out cell to go to this church service which is special. We got to give them something to work towards. You can't have disciplinaries. You've got to be, GP this level inmate that, so there's a whole different level thing. So yeah, they're going to provide that. Or is it successful? I think that is just, depending on what you mean of success.
Right. I always told my offenders that were in the program, I always told them, hey, you what you put in, you'll get out of it. If you really want to change, if you really want to stop using drugs or, creating criminal behaviors and things of that nature, you'll take the suggestions that people have given you along the way. You'll put that into your own life. You'll put it into your own actions, and you'll do something different. But a lot of times that we've noticed, we have the sociopaths that they're eager to change, but they're very impulsive. So, they could be doing good, almost off parole, bam, they go back and use, or they commit another crime, or they're riding with somebody who has dope on them. So they get a new dope charge or something of that nature. It's very disheartening sometimes because people will only change whenever they realize that their same position is worse than the change that they're about to encounter. So I'd like to thank the chat
Mhm.
for all your questions and all your attentiveness. We could talk about this for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, because there's so much information about it. I'd like to thank my panel guests, Gabe Morales. Thank you for being here. Karla, thank you for being here. I'd like to invite you guys up one another time, and maybe we can have another discussion on other levels of criminal criminals and the thinking and things of that nature, because we really didn't even get to that part. We were just kind of on the tip of the iceberg. We didn't even really go into the thinking, the behaviors and things of that nature that both of you have seen through your years of working with criminal offenders. So um if you are up to it, maybe some other time we can get back up here and we can talk about the criminal mind. You know,
Sounds
um,
good.
Yeah, sounds
um,
good.
thank you so much, and I'm gonna close out the show. If you guys can hang around backstage when the credits roll, and I'd like to discuss some things with you guys if you're up to it. Thank you so much again for being on the panel.
You're welcome. Aloha.
Okay. And with that being stated, I'd like to cue the music. Once again, thank you. Hit a like and subscribe if you enjoyed what we presented tonight. We had individuals um, that were really knowledgeable on their stuff, and they have plenty of knowledge to share regarding the things that I'm trying to get across on this channel. And what better insight to go than to the source? So, you guys, I hope that you enjoyed the show. Maestro, cue the music.